The snow whispered around the ancient forest, where the wind whistled through the trees in a way that sounded almost like voices. As the winter moon shone down, a tall, crooked figure slipped through the shadows, her long, sharp nails scratching along tree bark as she walked. Her name was Vesper, and she was no ordinary witch. Vesper was known in the village as the kind of witch mothers told their children about when they misbehaved. If you wandered too far from home, they'd say, Vesper might find you. And those who met her rarely came back the same. But Vesper had grown bored with children and fools who wandered too close to her lair. She wanted something more, a mystery to unravel, and she'd become fixated on one particularly powerful enigma, Santa Claus. She'd heard whispers about him from traveling merchants and wandering strangers. They said he was a kind man, a figure of warmth and joy who traveled the world in a single night, bringing gifts to children and hope to the darkest winters. But Vesper was no fool. She knew that magic like his came at a price. For nights, she watched the stars, reading their hidden messages and waiting for a sign that would lead her to the great sorcerer. Finally, on the eve of December 23rd, she saw it. A streak of silver light across the sky, like a signal flaring from the heavens. That will be him, she muttered with a wicked smile, her crooked teeth glinting in the moonlight. And I'll find out his secrets before he even knows I'm coming. Vesper packed her things, a worn leather satchel filled with bone shards, vials of strange potions, and a single jagged iron blade that pulsed with a sickly green light. With a shuffling step, she followed the path through the darkened forest toward the north, where the light had vanished over the horizon. The journey was treacherous. The cold clawed at her skin, icy and unforgiving, as the snow grew deeper and the trees gave way to barren plains of white. The winds howled as if they wanted to knock her off her path, but Vesper was determined, her breath steaming in clouds before her as she pressed on. Finally, as she climbed a snowy ridge, she spotted something through the swirling snowflakes, a small cluster of lights, like tiny stars dotting the landscape below. Vesper grinned. She had found it, the hidden village of the North Pole. But as she crept closer, something strange caught her eye. The village was empty. The colorful buildings, the workshop, everything was quiet. She couldn't smell the scent of gingerbread, nor hear the cheerful laughter she'd expected. Instead, she heard a low, rumbling hum, a sound that crawled beneath her skin and made her bones ache. She approached the nearest building, pressing her ear to the door, and froze. Inside, she heard muffled voices, soft and frantic, like whispers clawing to get out. "Don't go in," they said. "Please, for your own sake." Vesper sneered. Warnings had never scared her. She kicked the door open, her sharp nails gleaming in the dim light. The room was filled with shelves upon shelves of toys, all lined up in perfect, eerie rows. But there was something wrong with them. The toys' eyes followed her as she moved, lifelike and pleading, each one seeming to silently beg her for something she couldn't understand. She picked one up, a doll with a blank face and wide, unblinking eyes. As soon as she touched it, a voice echoed in her mind. "He's coming," it whispered. "You can't escape him." Vesper tossed the doll aside and turned to leave, but she froze in the doorway. A shadowy figure stood at the end of the corridor, just beyond the dim candlelight, his face obscured. "Who are you?" she hissed, clutching the jagged iron blade in her hand. The figure took a step forward, his boots echoing ominously in the empty hall. As he emerged from the darkness, she could see him clearly. A tall, broad man in a crimson cloak trimmed with fur. His beard was thick and white, and his eyes were an unnatural, piercing blue that seemed to see right through her. "Santa Claus," he said, his voice as deep as the thunder. But something was wrong with his smile. There was a coldness there, an edge that sent a shiver down her spine. "You're not what I expected," Vesper sneered, hiding her fear. "But I'm here to take your magic." Santa chuckled, a sound that echoed through the empty halls like nails scraping on metal. "You think you're the first witch to come looking for me?" he asked, his voice dripping with amusement. "You think I haven't dealt with your kind before?" Vesper narrowed her eyes, raising her blade. "I'm not like the others." "Oh, I know." Santa took another step closer, and the temperature dropped. Frost spread across the walls, creeping toward her like a living thing. "But do you know what happens to those who try to steal from me?" Vesper opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, Santa raised his hand, and a wave of icy energy rushed toward her. She raised her blade to block it, but it was useless. The cold pierced her skin, filling her veins, and she dropped to her knees, gasping. Santa knelt down, his face inches from hers. She could smell something metallic on his breath, like rusted iron. "I take back what's mine," he said softly, "and I never let it go." With a flick of his wrist, he touched her forehead, and a surge of darkness filled her mind. Her vision blurred, and she heard voices, countless voices, whispering and laughing, each one carrying a sense of dread that made her heart pound. "No," she gasped, trying to claw her way back to reality. "No, this isn't how it's supposed to be." Santa's smile widened, revealing teeth that were far sharper than any human's. "Oh, but it is. You wanted to know my secret, didn't you?" The whispers grew louder, filling her mind until she couldn't think, couldn't breathe. She was falling into a dark abyss, surrounded by faces, all of them twisted and laughing, their eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. And then she understood. Each one of them was a witch, a sorcerer, a foolish soul who had tried to claim Santa's power. They were trapped here, bound to his magic, forever lost in his web of darkness. Vesper tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the shadows, and her vision faded into blackness. The next morning, the villagers found a strange new toy on the doorstep of their home, a small lifelike doll with wide, unblinking eyes and a frozen scream on her face. No one knew where it had come from, but the children were warned not to play with it, and it was left to gather dust on a shelf. And far to the north, in the hidden village, Santa Claus prepared for his annual journey, his sleigh loaded with gifts, and his smile just a little too sharp for comfort. For every Christmas, he carried a few extra presents, reminders of those who had tried to take what was his. And as he took to the skies that night, a faint whisper followed in his wake, a sound that was swallowed by the wind and snow but lingered just enough to make you wonder. For if you listened carefully, you might still hear the distant, pleading voice of a witch who had dared to look too deeply into the heart of Christmas magic and paid the price.